Hello and welcome to the NVR Podcast, Series 2, Episode 16. I'm Rachael Aylmer.
And I'm Peter Jakob.
And today we're talking about the vulnerability of parents. How did we get to this topic, Peter? Our preamble.
Well, I mean, you're a parent. I'm a parent. I guess there are many, many vulnerabilities and different kinds of vulnerabilities. But I think we kind of focused on a particular kind of vulnerability, which emerges when a child, a young person, very loudly protests that the parents are treating them badly, shouts, screams, wails. What came to mind just now was a foster carer I worked with one time, where a boy said, I'm not wearing my hoodie. And she said, well, it's cold outside. I can't let you go out without wearing a hoodie. And the boy said, I'm not going out. I'm going outside. And she said, well, you've got to wear a hoodie. And apparently he sort of threw himself against the radiator and started screaming, ow, 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 she's hurting me. And the impact on this foster mom was quite devastating. And for example, she lived in a terraced house. She avoided eye contact with the next door neighbor, thinking that the next door neighbor thinks that she hurt the child. And she was wondering whether she needed to report it as an incident, and file an incident report. And it's just an example, and I've come across, and I think you said earlier, you've come across many such examples of where when the child casts the parents, or in this case, the foster carer, in a particular light and accuses them of being abusive, that makes the parent very vulnerable to criticism, to judgment, to misperception by others. And you said that you'd just recently come across it in some supervision.
Yeah, this morning, a colleague who I supervise in an adoption agency, a post-adoption social worker, described a parent experiencing just that her adopted son was playing up and presenting with lots of challenging behaviours, and then went into the school and claimed that the mother, had been harming him in some way. But also, I think what's really important here is these are not one-off isolated incidents. The parents are already carrying their own experience of shame and guilt and vulnerabilities, because these behaviours have been going on for a while. In this example, the parent already felt the school judged her already. So that deeper seated belief that others believe I am not a good parent, I am not a capable parent, I am not able to meet my needs of my child. So that vulnerability is really, really entrenched. That it's not just a one-off isolated incident of, I feel a bit vulnerable because my child just shouted out to a passerby. This is like taking my kid to school and the parents' belief that the school feel that she's a rubbish mother.
It's a very deep-seated anxiety, feeling blamed, feeling shamed. What was it? I mean, I don't know whether you know in this case, what was it that the mother already believed that she was being criticized or judged by people in the school?
I think there were some issues around getting her child to school on time, in a fashion, wearing a uniform, etc. The usual old kind of restrictions that parents with challenging children face. And her sense of struggles of getting him to school on time in a uniform with an attitude to learn. This is a challenging young person, and what she's experienced, I didn't go into detail, but I'm making an assumption that perhaps there's been a judgment and criticism or a sense of that, and that might have been magnified by this mother because of her own fear of guilt and embarrassment that she's one of the parents that can't do it. It's my kid that isn't going.
So that is so pernicious. So,
oh, what a lovely word.
Yeah, painful, isn't it? Because the mother probably feels that people in the school believe she's neglectful or that she doesn't care and don't appreciate you mentioned those struggles,
Yeah.
And then often parents end up between a rock and a hard place, don't they?
So, yeah, I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't.
I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't. So what if he's not going to put on his tie? Or what if he insists on wearing trainers instead of his black shoes? Do I have to force him? But if I force him, that's a child protection concern.
Yeah.
But if I don't force him, that's also a child protection concern because I'm negligent, neglectful. And
to add to that, the practitioners working with this mother about slowing things down and really embodying her parental presence, and by doing so and practicing some resistance and de-escalation, what the mother feels is that when people witness that she's doing nothing. So there's another judgment. Oh, look at that mother now. He's doing this, this, and this, and she's just standing there. It's like, poor thing. Poor mum. How does she grow presence when she feels so judged?
You really end up feeling for her, don't you?
For sure.
There's something about also, I guess, that identity of being a parent, and particularly where there's a different weight on generally or often on women's shoulders than on men's shoulders. Women still carry more of the responsibility of parenting than men in general. So much of one's sense of who I am is tied up with the quality of my parenting. It constitutes much of what I value in myself and what I see valued in me when I look at myself through the eyes of others. And if I look at myself through the eyes of others and what I see is someone who doesn't care, and even if that doesn't match my sense of myself, my knowledge of who I am, even if it doesn't match that, it still undermines who I am, doesn't it?
Yeah, and undermines who I am, but everything I might stand for as a parent. I think about my own values and beliefs as a parent, about why I might have had a child or why I'm looking after a child and why I want to be a parent. And that, for me, the anxiety for a parent who's experiencing judgment and criticisms by others, or even if they're not explicit, the sense of feeling judged by the school staff, by the school environment, is such a vulnerable place to be. It's a really vulnerable place to be.
I was just thinking of our training and how in our training we convey how professionals can ask questions or communicate with parents in a way that they position themselves safely, that they are emotionally safe in the attitude they take towards the parents, in the questions they ask and the things they say. I was just thinking maybe we should introduce an exercise of the worst possible questions that professionals can ask, because they just started coming up in my mind, sort of like, so your son doesn't put on his uniform when you ask him to in the mornings. Why do you think it is that you can't control him?
Yeah.
And I'm just imagining if I'm the mother and I hear this question, it would be like, it would go deep into even my physical responsiveness. I would feel silenced, paralyzed. It would, I mean, I don't know whether that was an exaggeration, that question, or maybe it was actually realistic,
Yeah, my sense is to really help parents embody a greater sense of themselves in such environments, to be able to withstand the challenges your child is facing you with, to help you overcome that. But at the same time, how do you also overcome those external voices of criticism and those prescriptive attitudes of how does parents, it's like a double whammy, isn't it? Not only do I have to understand and practice this resistance and being non-violent to my child, but I also have to overcome those judgments of others.
But I'm just wondering whether overcoming is the next step. And maybe the first step is acknowledging what happens, and then to look at overcoming. I was just thinking of a cartoon, a comic I used to have in my office. I don't know what became of it. And it's a mother and a child at a bus stop with lots of people standing around. And the child is on the ground, screaming, kicking, shouting, "I want ice cream! I want ice cream!" And the mother is just sort of tentatively holding on to the child's hand. And all the people around her have something to say or are thinking something. So there are these speech bubbles and thought bubbles, and they're all different, And like there's one speech bubble that says, "This is child abuse. Someone ought to report it," And then there's another one, "These children nowadays, spare the rod and spoil the child," and comments about the mother, comments about the child, then there were some people who were not saying anything, but they were sort of like looking away, and there were the thought bubbles, thinking things like, well, what will have happened to this child that she acts in this way, and so forth. And the mother, she's just paralyzed. She's just standing there, and no, not paralyzed, immobilized. The cartoonist captured that so beautifully. She was immobilized. So I guess taking steps about that is something about finding a way of movement again, if that makes sense. To come out of that immobilization. And I mean, what's your sense of how people come out of or start coming out of that state of being immobilized?
I'm thinking about parents I've worked with, about how they can reconnect with themselves, in those moments. So when you're when you're in the face of that fear of being judged by others, particularly in a school environment, from teaching staff. I mean, we portray this awful image, don't we, of these teachers all being judged. and then, for any listeners from the education book, there are an immensely supportive systems in school. Of course there are. And sometimes even when those lovely support systems are in place, parents are just so involved with their own guilt and shame that they can't see the support that's being offered. But I'm thinking about a parent who is immobilized, about that reconnecting with the self, reconnecting with what they're doing and why they're doing it, and having some faith in their actions that they're taking, having some kind of embodied sense. If I'm doing this because for the good of my child, I'm taking this action, I'm resisting this harm because I love my child. How might the invitation be for the parent to really reconnect with themselves and then their child?
So to realize that I'm doing this on the basis of good values, good parenting values, but how do we facilitate that as NVR practitioners? How do we help the parent reconnect with those values, with those meanings of their action, which may result in the child exploding, having a temper tantrum, accusing them of all manner of things which may not be true? How do we facilitate the parent reconnecting with what?
I don't know, Peter, you tell me how they...
Well, I mean, we must do it all the time in our work. I guess one thing is questions about those values.
That was exactly what we were talking about in supervision, having conversations that are difficult but vital, having conversations about inviting parents to share the parent that they want to be, inviting them to consider the positions that they want to take. How do they see themselves in those moments? What do they think their child sees in those moments of when they're being immobilized? And it's working within those constraints and inviting parents, I think, as well, to make a small commitment of what they might want to do differently, of how they might begin to change their responses, to change their positions, to even if it's walking away and not saying anything to whoever, that's an action that they've committed to take, and then exploring that. What did that feel like?
So part of what we can do is help create an inner balance, help the parent create an inner balance by looking at, wait a minute, what kind of a mother, kind of a father am I? What kind of a mother do I recognize in myself that is different from what this other person seems to think? So to perhaps invite her to trust her own perception of herself as a way out of the confusion that comes about by the communicated perception of her as being very different from what she actually feels she is. So it's a step out of confusion.
Yeah, I like that. I like that step out of confusion, just a little bit more clarity to the position that I'm taking.
I'm also thinking of, there's so many reasons why when NVR practitioners introduce the notion of the support network, or as I have come to call it, the caring community, building a caring community around a family. There's so many reasons why parents initially often say, oh, I can't do that, and sometimes their answers are very brief and often reductive, like, oh, I don't have anybody. I don't know anybody, and I remember one time saying, what, you haven't spoken to another adult in the last 10 years? But
yeah, I can do one better than that. When I was doing it and I said to a parent, so you have no neighbours, you live on a hill in the middle of nowhere? And they said, yes. We do.
She got you there.
Oh, God.
But actually, I guess even if the parent has identified a friend, a neighbor, a relative who's probably not going to judge her, who's probably not going to believe that she is unnecessarily harsh in her disciplining of the child or cruel or whatever, she may still have that embodied expectation that would happen. So just like there's a clash between who she knows she is when she checks in with her own values and who she sees herself as when she looks at herself through the eyes of someone who is critical towards her. There might also be a confusion about the other, So I know that my mom is probably supportive of me and won't judge me or tell me what I'm doing wrong or worse. But still, maybe my body isn't convinced of that because I've absorbed all this criticism into my body. So I think there's a lot of there's scope, isn't there, for us when we're working on facilitating the support network to look into that with the parent and to help the parent develop a reality check. Okay, what are the things that your mother has said or done, or the body language she's shown, or what she hasn't done in the past that makes you feel ashamed when you think of telling her exactly what's going on? And maybe there isn't so much. So it's important to help the parent with the reality check. And while I often speak of using body sensations to help identify when there is critical communication, I think we can also pair that or need to pair that with the reality check as well.
Yeah.
So you might be responding in your body because you've had that experience with that other person. Or you might be feeling that in your body because you've had that experience with other people. Yeah. And it's really helpful at that point to focus on what is real.
Yeah. What is actually going to be what is happening here? Yeah. What is real?
Yeah.
That's really important.
And I think of the way Chaim Omer says, part of the function of the support network is what he calls moral support. And I would imagine this balance in the portrayal of the parent is part of that moral support. So we'd have the internal balance that you spoke of in terms of realizing, well, actually, this is the mother, this is the father I am, and it's not the way I've been portrayed. But also to have people in that caring community that can metaphorically or actually put an arm around my shoulders and say, hey, that was important what you did, and I think you're showing your son the right path, and so forth.
Yeah. That was what I talked about in supervision as well, about how might the practitioner acknowledge those, appreciative witnessing in the parent's efforts when she is resisting, and the determination that he may see in the mother, but also how the community of help recognize that in the mother as well.
Yeah.
Begin to disperse some of those senses of those vulnerabilities that the mother might be experiencing.
It makes me think of how important it is for us to slow down.
That was another thing came up in supervision.
What's it? How did it come up?
Well, I did break out into a Bucks Fizz song about, some people want us to speed it up and some people want us to slow it down. But that probably went straight over your head. But anyway.
You mean that was a contemporary cultural reference?
That was a song titled Bucks Fizz. But anyway.
Listen, Rachel, you know that I started tuning out when I was tuning into Bruce Springsteen. But I mean a young Bruce Springsteen.
Okay. So you're not going to be aware of the Eurovision Song Contest winners?
Yeah, no.
Anyway, this topic comes up a lot in our feedback of training. It's too slow. and other people go, it's too fast, we need to slow it down, there's so much content, we need to slow things down. And actually it is our preference to slow things down.
Yeah, and I was thinking, when you approach that, when we're in this sphere of the parent's vulnerability, if we can call it that, and you approach that in conversation, and the parent says, no, I don't want anybody involved in this. Yeah, this is a family business. Oh, yeah. If we then move on and think, oh, that didn't work, or if we move on because we think, oh, well, I would not be respecting the parent if I insisted. Of course, it's not a good idea to insist. We are possibly not doing the parent justice. And I was thinking of some colleagues in Calgary, in Canada, who've started what they call an impossibility clinic. And they work on the basis, so anyone can ask for a consultation with the impossibility clinic, any professional in our fields, of social care, mental health, education, and so forth. And they present impossible situations, dilemmas. And one of the principles that they work on is that they say, when you're facing impossibility, you don't want to just overcome the impossibility right away. You don't want to ignore it either. You want to, I don't know whether that's their words or mine, hover around the impossibility and see what you can learn from it. So I'm thinking, if there's a situation where the NVR practitioner sits with the parents or with the parent and experiences that impossibility, NVR tells me we need a support network. I feel the parents need a support network. The parents are telling me, no way are they going to bring anyone in. Well, then that's an impossible situation. What do we do? Do we become insistent and say, well, but you need somebody? Well, that's not going to be helpful. Do we say, oh, okay, then we'll talk about something else? That may not be helpful either. Maybe we can stay with that impossibility and explore the impossibility together with the parent.
I like that, exploring the impossibility. What a nice solution focus that brings. Yeah. The impossibility meetings.
Yeah. Okay, seems like we've come to an end. What do we pull together from this conversation?
The vulnerabilities of parents can be instilled by others, but not necessarily always. Sometimes parents can bring their own fears of judgment that they might have experienced a long, long time ago that have sat with them for a long period of time. That there's a reality of actual judgment and criticism, and then there could be a place of difference.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that it is the practitioner's job to help the parent find a balance to those negative voices in themselves and in their social environment.
Yeah. It's big. It
is big. I think it's at the core of much of what we do in NVR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everyone that we work with comes with a set sense of judgment.
Yeah.
Okay. Until we meet again, Peter.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's goodbye from me.
And from me.